Welcome to the 11th Annual Writers' Symposium by the Sea at Point Loma Nazarene University. I'm Dean Nelson on the journalism faculty at the university, and with us today is Donald Miller, whose book Blue Like Jazz has reached an extraordinary level of popularity, especially among college-age readers. He's also written books titled Searching for God Knows What, Through Painted Deserts, which had a former title of Prayer in the Art of Volkswagen Maintenance, and his new book, which will come out shortly, To Own a Dragon, Reflections on Growing Up Without a Father. Please give a Writers' Symposium welcome to Donald Miller. It's going to be good, man. It's going to be good.
Thank you. It's great to be here, especially by the sea in sunny weather. I have a book coming out called To Own a Dragon that will be out within a few days, probably. And I wanted to do a bit of a reading, just a short reading from that book tonight. It's a book about growing up without a father. And it's been a fun, painful journey kind of writing the book. And I wanted to be able to take a look at the issue from a sort of humorous perspective. So some of the book is funny. So I want you to know that if you hear something you think is funny, it's okay to laugh. You're not laughing at me because I grew up without a father. You don't have to, ha ha ha, you didn't have a dad. You don't have to feel that way. So let me just do a little reading from this, and then we'll get to some questions and answers. In the absence of a real father, I had a cast of characters that were at times hilarious, pitiful, perfect, kind, and wise. Here they are. My first father was a black man on television who wore bright Argyle sweaters. He lived in New York or Chicago, I can't remember which. He was incredibly intelligent and had a knockout for a wife. I'm talking about Bill Cosby. When I was a kid, I wanted to be Theo Huxtable. I liked the way Theo dressed. I liked that he was confident with women, and even though he didn't make good grades, he still felt good about himself. And he had good-looking sisters who were both older and younger, and who always gave him encouragement and advice about life, along with safe male-female tension. I liked that Bill Cosby had money, too, tons of cash, and certain philosophies about saving and spending that gave the family a sense of security, which turned his knockout wife on and had her singing slow, sultry blues melodies to him from the bed while he brushed his teeth in the master bathroom. Bill Cosby never panicked about small things. He never got worked up about broken windows or cereal on the floor, and if he did get worked up, it was more like a comedy routine than a drunken rampage. He also laughed at himself, which was endearing, and I would sit in front of the little black and white television in my room and live vicariously through the made-up life of the Huxtables, who had celebrity guests coming through the house every few episodes to play the trombone or tap dance. My mom was great, don't get me wrong, but the only guests we ever had at our house were from the singles group at church, and none of them ever whipped out a trombone to play When the Saints Go Marching In, or tap danced in the living room, or recited a piece of epic prose about the Underground Railroad on which our people had traversed from oppression and slavery to freedom. Our guests, rather, ate meatballs on paper plates and talked bitterly about their ex-husbands. I also like the fact that on The Cosby Show, there was never any serious conflict. When Theo graduated from college, for example, the conflict simply involved the family only having 10 tickets to the graduation ceremony. Bill wanted to invite the whole neighborhood. All the ladies kept looking at him and shaking their heads because Bill Cosby's love for his family was always causing him to make a mess of things. They would shake their heads and laugh, and he would make a funny face, and Theo would throw his hands up, look at the ceiling, and roll his eyes while exclaiming, "Gosh, Dad." And I would roll over backward on the floor and look up at the ceiling, sigh, and say under my breath, "Black people have it perfect." White people had interesting fathers too, but nothing to make a sitcom about. When I was growing up, my friend Tom had a father, and I learned from this that a real father doesn't have jazz singers over to perform in the living room before dinner, and that real families with fathers don't lip-sync Motown tunes or give speeches at college graduations. Rather, real fathers, at least at Tom's house, clean guns while watching television. We'd eat the lawn with one hand while holding a beer in the other, and squeeze their wives' butts in the kitchen while she is cooking dinner. And because of Tom's father, and because I watched The Cosby Show with the devotion of a Muslim, I came to believe a man... I came to believe a man was supposed to be around the house to arm and disarm weapons, make sexual advances on the matriarch, perform long and colorful ad-libs with children about why they should clean their room, and above all, always face the camera, even if the entire family had to sit on one side of the table during dinner. My mother was the only female father in my Boy Scout troop, and God knows she tried. But the truth is, she had no idea what she was doing. We had a Pinewood Derby car race where you had to carve a car out of a block of wood, then set it on a ramp and race some other guy with a Pinewood car. I came in dead last. The night we made the cars, my mom dropped me off at the den mother's house and trusted the fathers who were in the garage making their sons' cars to also help make mine. But they didn't. I didn't care. I just wanted to drill holes in the cement driveway with a cordless drill. I don't even think my car had wheels when it came time to race. Just a lot of WD-40 on the bottom of a block of wood and a stripe down the middle like that car in the Dukes of Hazzard. And on race night, with 100 Boy Scouts standing around and 200 moms and dads standing around with them, my block of wood slid down the ramp at quarter speed and came to a sudden stop right about the time the ramp gave way to flatness. Everybody got quiet. I just stood there with my hands on my hips, shaking my head, saying, "That General Lee, always breaking down." My mom was terribly upset about the incident, but I didn't realize it at the time. We picked up the General Lee and left early, right after my mother had sharp words for the men in our den group, who spoke sharply back to her about a driveway full of drill holes. But Mom kept trying. She asked our landlord's son, who was a pothead, if he would take me to the Boy Scout father and son campout. His name was Matt, and he drove a red Volkswagen Bug and listened to Leonard Skinner tapes and ended every sentence with the phrase, "Do you know what I mean, dude?" He was pretty cool, but I think he felt out of place around the other fathers, men who were approximately 20 years older than he was, and drove trucks or minivans, and were married, and rarely, if ever, smoked pot. Or for that matter, listened to Leonard Skinner. I think both of us felt out of place at the father and son campout. After all, we'd only met once before, when Matt had come over to the house to change the light bulbs on the front and back porch. "Hey, little man," he said to me, looking down from his ladder, "how can I put a bulb in this thing when there's already a bulb in it?" "Do you know what I mean, dude?" On the last night of the campout, we were sitting around a fire, and the fathers were telling about their favorite memories with their sons. And when it came time for Matt to talk about me, he sat silent for a minute. As I said, Matt and I had spent little time together before the campout. I was searching my mind for any kind of memory, and considered talking about the great time he changed the light bulbs, and how he had to move the ladder a couple times, and how I helped him by turning the switch on and off. I knew it was a boring story, but I thought I might embellish it a bit by insisting both of us got electrocuted and had to give each other CPR. But then Matt broke the silence. Having searched for any kind of memory himself, he told about the car ride on the way to the campout, how we stopped at McDonald's and had to jumpstart the Bug, and how we played air guitar and bashed our heads against the dashboard to the tune of Sweet Home Alabama. Times with our sons or with our neighbors' kids are important. Do you know what I mean, dude? Matt said to the fathers, most of them looking very confused. I nodded my head. I know what you mean, I said, breaking the awkward silence. Sure you do, Doug, he chortled, rubbing my head. It's Don, I corrected. My name is Don. Sure it is, little man, he said to me with a confused look on his face. Then Matt, realizing his story had fallen flat, started telling us how he made out with a cheerleader in the janitor's closet when he was in high school. Another father stopped him just short of second base. A prepubescent collective grunt went out when the story was interrupted, but Matt finished it the next day when we were waiting in line to get in a canoe. The smell of ammonia apparently still turns him on. Matt was great, but not much of a guide in the father sense, and he went off to the Army shortly after the campout, so I never learned important things he knew, like how to actually get the girl to go into the janitor's closet, or how to drive for 2 years without a license. The next guy was more fatherly, but straight as an arrow, which was nice for a change, but he was also nuts. His name was Mr. Kilpin, and he went to our church. His big thing was to fly remote control airplanes in a field. It was exciting at first, for about 20 minutes or so, but he would never let me control the plane. He would stand there wearing some sort of military hat he must have picked up in Vietnam, and his eyes would get as big as planets as he made the plane dip down and sweep across the field, all the while making bombing noises with his mouth. Did you see that, Donald? He'd ask. You got those commie bastards, I'd say. Sort of looking around for a frisbee or something. I kept asking every 2 minutes if he would let me fly the plane, but each time he would say, maybe next time, maybe for a few seconds the next time we went out. I had to endure 3 weekends of simulated bombing runs over the Mekong Delta before he finally gave in to my pestering and let me take the sticks. Within 8 seconds, I had flown the thing into a tree. At which point, Mr. Kilpin shrieked and ran across the field shouting, "We've got men down. We've got men on the ground." And all the way home, he lectured me about the kinds of torture a captured pilot has to endure. And we never spent any time together after that. The next guy was an enormous improvement and proved to be just what I needed as a makeshift father figure. He was the youth minister at my church and was hired about the time I started junior high. His name was David Gentiles, and because most last names are derived from what our ancestors did for a living, I assumed David had come from a small community that politely wanted to differentiate between themselves and Jews. David could never authenticate my suspicion, but I told him this was probably the case. I lived about 3 blocks from the church, so I would go over and visit David in his office. I sat across from him, talking about the state of affairs in the world, football, the weather, girls, all the while going through his desk looking for rubber bands I could shoot at him while he tried to study the Bible. I'd find pencils I could fling into the ceiling tiles or explain at length the many ways he could rearrange his office. David never asked me to leave, and looking back, I have no idea why. Either he enjoyed being around me or he was a very good actor. Regardless, he liked my ideas and would nod in agreement when I told him he didn't need a desk, that Ronald Reagan worked standing up, and this would free space in his office for a small putting green and a contraption that shoots the golf ball back to you. I used to sit and look at the books on David's shelf, asking intelligent and probing questions about each one. "What's that book about the Civil War about?" I'd ask. "The Civil War," he'd answer. "What about that one about Abraham Lincoln?" "That one's a cookbook," he'd tell me. After I inquired about 20 or so of his books, he asked if I was interested in books. I told him I didn't know anything about them, that the problem with most books is they were too long. Then he turned me on to some poetry, which was good because it was shorter. David said girls just loved the stuff. I went home and read through a lot of it and memorized a couple, and he seemed pretty impressed with that. He asked me a little later if I had ever thought about writing. He told me he thought I had a knack for understanding poetry and wondered if I would be interested in writing a guest editorial for the youth group newsletter. "I've seen a lot of growth in you, Don," he said while we were walking down the church hallway. "You really have a way with words, and your spiritual life has developed quite uniquely, quite beautifully. And I feel like you could deal with spirituality in a delicate manner, getting to the heart of our faith. Would you be interested in writing an article?" "Does the Pope crap in the woods?" I told him. I spent the next week poring over the dictionary for the biggest, most obscure words I could find. Words like loquaciousness and flabbergasted. I was going to knock Dave's socks off with my smarts. The first sentence of my article read, "The loquaciousness of pious rhetoric has developed into a pariah in the corridors of First Baptist Church." The article was about how everybody was stupid except for me and Dave. And went on to name the top 10 most boring people at First Baptist Church. I turned the article into David, and he sat behind his desk and kind of hummed and coughed as he read, his eyes getting big and his hands flattening the paper, and his head suddenly jolting back when he came to the end of a paragraph. He put his hand on his forehead and looked at me in bewilderment, probably wondering how such brilliant writing could come at such a young age. "Good use of exclamation points," he finally said. "Your punctuation is remarkable." And looking back, I believe it was. I've always been good at punctuation. Right. David kindly explained, however, the article might be a bit critical, and I might consider writing about something I like, people I like, perhaps do a review of a movie or a record, or maybe write up a concert or something going on at school. I told him those were all good ideas, but as a journalist, I would need to make up my own mind about what I would write, and that, as much as I respected him, I wasn't going to be a pawn for the man. "I would never ask you to compromise," David said. "Thanks," I told him, leaning back in my chair and crossing my legs. "I'm not a big fan of corporate." "Well, me neither," he said with a confused look on his face. So there happened to be a talent show going on at school that week, and I decided I would interview some of the talent and write a review. I sat in the back with a notebook on my lap, hoping people would ask why I had that notebook on my lap, or for that matter, a pencil behind each ear, or for that matter, a hat with an index card on which was printed the word press. I roamed during the show, walking the aisles, trying to get a feel for audience reaction. Then I went backstage as a band called Dead Man Sweat did a partially intelligible 12-minute rendition of Pour Some Sugar on Me, toward the end of which the lead singer opened a bag of sugar and poured it over his long, dark hair, causing the principal to put an end to the music. The lead singer had to sweep up the mess before 3 girls came out and did a dance from the movie Flashdance. The girls danced sultrily against and on top of chairs as some guys from the football team squirted water on them from the wings. This was also, unfortunately, interrupted. But I interviewed them all. I interviewed the rock band asking, "Sugar is a metaphor for what?" Earlier that week I had learned what a metaphor was, and the concept fascinated me. "Leg warmers are a metaphor for what?" I asked the girls who did the flash dance. Then this girl came up, this girl from my youth group whom I had mostly ignored that year, and she stepped to the microphone and shyly said hello, and that she would like to sing a Christian song for Jesus. You can't sing a song for Jesus at a high school talent show, I thought to myself. The audience threw out some cold remarks about going back to Mayberry, and when the piano accompaniment started, she belted out, quite possibly, the worst rendition of His Eyes on the Sparrow ever performed, save Roger Bobo's tuba rendition with the Canadian brass. The crowd had a field day. It was like the Gong Show. People were rolling in the aisles, and standing backstage, I started feeling a little sorry for her. And then something strange happened in my chest. What I mean is there is this fight or flight thing that happens when you decide whether you are going to associate with somebody or disassociate yourself. Somebody who has fallen down or coughed up their food. Whether you are going to say you never knew her, didn't attend the same church, didn't worship the same God, or whether you're going to, well, clap. And I clapped. I mean, when she finished, I clapped, and I meant it. It felt good to take a stand for somebody who nobody else was taking a stand for. And she came off the stage, and I asked her what the sparrow was a metaphor for. And then I told her I thought she did a great job, that I was proud of her. She looked at me with this huge smile, and you could tell she was very nervous and relieved at the same time. And I went home that night, and I wrote an article saying I thought God might have been kind of happy with the talent show. And I wrote about how I thought we should all be willing to make complete idiots of ourselves for God, and how even if our voices sounded like, quote, a chicken in a cage with a ferret, we should be willing to praise God with the pipes God gave us. The tagline at the end of the article, the real clincher, the tearjerker exclamation point was this: and even though everybody in the auditorium was booing that night, and even though Monica shouldn't be allowed to sing the national anthem at a chess tournament, the angels in heaven were clapping, and the opinions of angels matter more than the opinions of people, because angels can fly. I gave the article to Monica first, and I stood there while she read it. And about halfway through, her eyes started to water. And about 3/4 through, she put her hand over her mouth. And when she finished, she looked me in the eye with the tenderest, most vulnerable look, dropped the piece of paper, and ran down the hall of the math wing. I knew then that I had the gift. That David Gentiles was right, that I could move people with words, encourage them, and change their lives forever. And even though Dave thought it best that I rewrite the article and take out several of the harsher adjectives and the bit about the chicken in the cage with the ferret, the thing still had power. And I got a lot of calls from people at the church, and people stopped me in the halls to say, "Good job," and that line about angels having wings is a very interesting point. I only tell you all of this to say David Gentiles, who could have done just about anything else with his time, decided to spend time with me and give me a shot at writing. He was somebody who stepped into my life and helped me believe I was here on purpose and for a purpose. And I don't think there are very many things that are more important than this when we are kids. So that's from To Own a Dragon. So thanks for listening.
So, you write in coffee shops? I mean, a lot of people need isolation. They need silence. You need caffeine and commotion. Every time I read something about you writing, I was in this coffee shop. How does that work?
Well, I have a system. It's changing, but the system you're referring to is the coffee shop system. And so what I do in Portland is I'll go to a coffee shop, I'll write there. If I have a good day, I'll come there the next day. And a good day is more than 800 words. And so I'll write there the next day. If I have a bad day, that coffee shop is now blacklisted. I don't like the people who go there, the people who work there.
The coffee's bad.
The coffee's bad,
right.
The whole deal. And we go to another coffee shop until that one stops working. So luckily, I live in the coffee capital of the world, so I figure I got about 8 more years in my career.
I didn't realize you were that superstitious.
Well, it's not about, it's not superstition, it's fact. That's how coffee shops work. It's deeply offended by the accusation.
Okay, now you write, the genre that a lot of people put your work in has to do with memoirs. Now, recent years, recent days, the word memoir has, the definition of that has gotten a little weird. James Fry's Million Little Pieces. With a memoir, apparently not. Does this make you nervous when stuff like this happens with James Fry's book?
No, it doesn't make me nervous.
What's your take on this?
My
Because
books
this
are
is
a
what
little,
you do.
Yeah, my book's a little more boring than James Fry's books. There's suspicion about memoirs. Memoirs became incredibly popular, and it was this whole new genre that was taking off probably about 5 or 6 years ago. And we all have, favorite memoirs, these sorts of things. What was great about that is the average person could write a book about their life, and it was as though it weren't about, when people were reading it, it was as though it weren't about the author as much as it was about seeing their own life and the story of a normal human existence. And there was something that was really beautiful about that. In terms of Fry, and I think, the mistake he made was that, he wrote a novel based on events in his life, couldn't get it published, and tried to get it done as a memoir. And so, that's the rub with what he did. But at the same time, in his defense, in our context, the reader really likes categories. They want fiction or nonfiction, memoir, biography, these sorts of things. And to some degree, I'm for blowing the categories out. And from a writer's perspective, categories can stifle me. I mean, for instance, in one of my books, I write, and I'm trying to illustrate a point. I'm trying to illustrate an idea. So I talk about a conversation that my friend Grant and I were having. He's one of my housemates, or he was one of my housemates. And I needed to bring something else into the conversation to bring in a perspective about this idea and how weird it was that we as humans do this thing. And I decided to employ an alien. And so I just brought an alien right into the conversation. He walks into the room, he sits down, he has a conversation with me and Grant. I didn't feel the need to explain to the reader that I don't believe in aliens, or aliens don't exist, or alien didn't actually come into the room.
That didn't happen?
No.
I read that?
Yeah. There was
didn't happen?
there was no alien, it turns out. But that doesn't mean that your personal experiences with aliens aren't true. I just made mine up. Right. Yeah.
All right, now, but it does raise the point of, when you write a memoir, isn't your contract with the reader that this happened? Unless it's like an alien thing, that it's just so bizarre that it couldn't. And I'll give you an example. Jay Leno's autobiography. There's an event in there that never happened. He heard another guy tell that. He paid him $1,000 for that story and said, I'd love to put that in my autobiography. Don't ever tell that again. Here's $1,000.
And Jay pretended it happened to him?
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, I don't do that.
I'll sell you an alien story.
I've never paid more than $500 for a story. Jay has a lot of money, so
But isn't that the contract, though, that when you read a memoir, an autobiography or something, that the reader assumes that this really happened? Right.
Well, I have to be careful how I answer this question, because the stuff in my books really happened, unless it's, and there are two ways that I will create something that didn't happen. Or two reasons, I should say, two motives. One is, if I think it's going to help me illustrate an idea, and if the point of the particular essay or chapter is the idea, is the fleshing out of an idea. So the point is not this happened to me or this didn't happen to me. The point is the truth that we're trying to get at with this. It was not very often that I've done that, but my own personal rule is, if I do that, the absurdity of what I'm adding into the text needs to tell the reader without me telling them that this never happened. Thus the alien story.
And maybe the difference between what you write and a James Fry kind of thing is, if it were to elevate you into this status of, look how remarkable I am, look at all these wonderful things I've overcome, and it becomes sort of a self-grandstanding,
right?
Which is not what you're talking about.
And here's the interesting thing, is I think that is one of the reasons people are offended by what Fry did. Where if he would have exaggerated to make himself look bad or like an idiot, probably we wouldn't have the heat on this situation that we do today. The other reason is that people's hearts really resonated with his story. He was asking for sympathy in a roundabout way, and compassion, and they were giving love to him, only to find out he had manipulated them to get it. And so that's, there's some offensive things in there. I should finish, though. The second reason that I will exaggerate or embellish or fudge a story or something like that is to get a laugh. And if I think it's funny, then I'm going to put it there. And if that makes me a bad person, I'm a bad person. But if it's funny, it's going in. But most of the time, most of the time, it's just absurd stuff, that the reader just goes, okay, well, he's, Here's a great example of this, and nobody got upset when David Sedaris did this. I'm reading through a David Sedaris book, and he has an essay where he's driving with his mother somewhere, and his mother runs over a rabbit that crosses the road. And she pulls the car over, both of them get out, the mother walks over to see if the rabbit is okay, and the rabbit stands up, cusses her out, and then hops into the woods. This is in the context of an essay where nothing else ridiculous happens in it. But Sedaris went, that's funny. And so he stuck it in there, and, I have a weakness for that,
Yeah. Cussing rabbits are funny.
Cussing rabbits are great.
That is funny.
I've run over 37 rabbits since then,
Just to
and
try
none
to
of
get
them,
one.
they don't cuss.
Yeah.
They might. Sometimes you hear a little something, but I'm not sure. Could be a thump.
A whimper. Now, the role of literature, it rolls around in your work. You make references in some of your works to Catcher in the Rye, to Emily Dickinson. In fact, I think you made a comment in one of your books that every thinking male has a crush on Emily Dickinson. Do you really think that?
No.
Yeah. Is that one of those absurd rabbit
That was an
cussing
exaggeration
Yeah, okay.
to get a broader mark. No, I don't know what that was. But
Okay, so what role does literature play? I mean, how has that...
in society or in...
No, in what you write.
It plays an enormous role. I mean, literature is... I didn't read a book. I didn't finish a book. I don't know that I read more than 10, 15 pages of any book, period, until after I graduated from high school. And I had no idea. I mean, I barely got out of there. And had no idea about literature or words. And I met a girl when I was spending a summer in Colorado. I met a girl there. We became pretty good friends, and we started riding back and forth. She lived in the Pacific Northwest. I lived in Texas. And she was a big literature buff. And so her birthday was coming up, and I went to the bookstore to try to find poetry by a female writer. I figured that would make me look good if I give her that book. And so I looked, and here was this Emily Dickinson girl. And of course, I'm an idiot. I've never read a book. And I pick it up, and, in the store, I'm just sort of thumbing through it, and I thought, wow, that's, And I sit down. I probably read 30 pages of it, bought it, took it home, signed it for her, happy birthday, Danielle, this sort of thing, and then could never mail it. I mean, there was just a sense of it. I must have read it cover to cover 50 times. And for me, it was the first time in my life when I encountered something that seemed magical, in the sense that it didn't feel human what Emily Dickinson was doing. It felt like you have channeled spirits or something to be able to talk the way you're talking, which ancient civilizations believed that. They believed that poets channeled spirits and they left them alone, which I think would be great these days if we could just kind of, if I could employ that. Just be at 7-Eleven, I will not have to buy this Slurpee, blah, blah, blah.
But you'd have to kind of wave your arm in front of them.
Yeah, I guess so. So, but that was the first time I encountered that. And different people encounter that in different places. And so some see it in landscape, some see it in painting, some in music. And for me, it was in literature, and it stuck. And I became a pretty ferocious reader after that, and then started writing, not very much later.
You mentioned Pride and Prejudice, but for different reasons.
Yeah, I still haven't finished the book. But I talk about how every single guy should have it on their shelf and should at least imply that they've read it, because it helps.
Yeah, it's done a lot for you, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's great. Single. Oh, no, wait.
I meant that in the best possible way.
I'm sure you did.
All right, so here's a line from Blue Like Jazz about writing. Writers don't make any money at all. We make about $1. It's terrible, but then again, we don't work either. We sit around in our underwear until noon and then go downstairs and make some coffee, fry some eggs, read the paper, read part of a book, smell the book, wonder if perhaps we ourselves should work on our book. Smell the book again, throw the book across the room because we're quite jealous that any other person who wrote a book, and we feel terribly guilty about throwing the schmuck's book around the room, and we wonder secretly if God in heaven noticed our evil jealousy, or worse, our laziness. And we then lie across the couch, face down, and mumble to God to forgive us because we're secretly afraid he's going to dry up all of our words because we envied another man's stupid words, and for this, as I said before, we are paid $1.
Well, wait, what's the next line, though? That's the critical line.
All right. We are worth so much more. Well, so you pretty well just described the whole anxiety thing that writers go through. Is that your anxiety?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, it's self-induced torture to be a writer. I mean, it's, you know, I hate it. It's the worst. It's the worst life you can possibly live, and yet, you know, and yet I wouldn't want anything else ever. I mean, this is it, and you just have to do it. And I just spent the last 2 months in a cabin on Orcas Island, in just south of Vancouver, writing a book, and at times you just feel like you're going crazy, you know, and it's so, I don't know why writers, William Zinsser said it this way: writers love to have written. And I think that's true. I cannot stand sitting down to write. And yet, you know, I have to, and I have to get this story out, or I have to perfect this thing or whatever. And so it's sort of this love, you know, hate relationship that I think a lot of writers have with their work.
And then in the next page, though, where you talk about really saying to yourself, I want to write for a lot of money, in hopes of money, but then you say, but there's not a lot of work in the Christian market if you won't write self-righteous conservative propaganda.
Ooh.
You said that, baby, not me.
But, you know, that was several years ago. And I am completely willing to write self-righteous conservative propaganda. As long as the money's there, I'll write anything you want me to write. I really don't care. You're asking me to critique?
I just want to know if that's if that's still how you feel, and if you've adequately answered that question. All right, let me ask you this. Do you remember what you did, at least according to what you wrote, what you did when you got your first book contract?
Oh, yeah. Oh, it was an amazing, yeah. I mean, I smelled it and I showed it to a bunch of people, and then I had this weird thing. I went and deposited my check that I got from the publisher, which was like for 83 cents or something like that. But I deposited it, and the lady at the bank saw that it was from a publishing company, and so she asked me what it was for, which gave me the opportunity to say, oh, well, I wrote a book, and I'm writing a book, and she congratulated me. Of course, that was so affirming that I began carrying the contract around with me, and would sort of have it at coffee shops, so hoping that people would ask me what sort of legal document. All you got to do is sign it and mail it back. But I wanted to keep it for a week or two, and I would drop it at the grocery store and say, "Excuse me, I need to pick up my book contract. Pardon me, I didn't cut you. Paper cut. Did I cut you? You're okay." So, I mean,
I think you even put it on the ground and rolled on it.
I did.
Yeah.
Which, you know, is fun to picture.
Yeah,
and,
well, my dog does that when he kills a rabbit.
As does David Sedaris, apparently.
Yeah, apparently. All right, so this was a huge moment for you, obviously, that you got this. But one of the questions I had probably even predates that says, a lot of what you write about is introspective and a reflection on the things that have gone on in your life and in your experience. At what point did you think what you thought about stuff was worth somebody else reading it? Was that just a slow dawning, or was there an aha moment for you? Or?
No, I never processed that idea. And I think that's one of the interesting, parts of the job, is that a lot of people think that you are sitting down to write a book for an audience, and it never feels that way. It's not that you don't care about the audience, or you don't want the audience to enjoy the book. You're sitting alone in a coffee shop or in a cabin, and you're looking at a computer, and it's just you. That's it. And you're not on a stage talking to a bunch of people. And so it's very hard to think about the reader in that place. I mean, you do as a writer, you just know what the reader is going to be able to take and what they're not going to be able to take, what's going to be funny, what's not going to be funny, those sorts of things. But for a long time, I've written for myself. And I'm hoping that when I say I'm writing for myself, I'm writing to the audience of thousands of people who are like me. And that means if I think it's funny, there's got to be somebody out there who's going to think it's funny. And if I think it's beautiful, then maybe there's somebody out there who's going to think it's beautiful too. And what that does, though, is it frees you to be more human and be more real and be more open. And it frees you also from writing like a politician, in the sense that you're being very careful not to offend this group of people, or being very, you're not going to make
trying to please them.
Yeah, you're just writing to people who are like you. And in the end, people who at least have some common experiences with you, or see the world a little bit the way you see the world, are going to resonate most strongly with your book. And even if they don't agree with you or see things from your perspective, at least they know who you are, where you stand, and what you feel. But I don't know, the stuff that's happened in my life has been very boring. And I'm not an exceptional human being. And there is no reason that anybody should read a book about my life. I haven't done anything, haven't felt anything. So, I never had to talk that up into myself.
But that doesn't fill you then with self-doubt when you sit down to write, because
no, because it's not necessarily a business in that sense. I mean, I'm not writing to make money, or writing with the presupposition that my life is so important that people should read about this. I'm writing because I have to write. And if I don't write, I'm going to go nuts. And that's it. I just have to get this stuff down, and I have to get the feelings on paper. Rembrandt has so many paintings of himself. Do you know why he did self-portraits? He couldn't afford to hire a muse. So he just got a mirror. He had to paint. And that's it. And that's a big part of it. And yeah.
All right. Now, but Rembrandt, that raises a different question, which is a lot of art, writing, sculpting, painting, whatever, comes from the artist who has been through some kind of pain and loss, and the art is then an expression, that comes out of that loss. Is that part of why you write? Is because of maybe growing up without a father or whatever? Are you aware that this is where your creative gifts are coming from?
I don't know if it's where the creative gifts are coming from. I think that has more to do with ADD than pain and loss. But there's a depth to, because my life has had some pain in it. I feel arrogant to say this. There's a broader range of colors with which to paint with. I mean, you have had joys and you have had lows, and you understand those things. And so, if you want to talk about the human experience, there's a broad range that you can of tools that you can use to do that. And so, I think it enhances the work a little bit. But it's a toss-up. I mean, there have literally been times, Dean, when I have wondered whether God gave me some of the experiences that I had in order that I could write them down and other people read them and not feel alone in their experiences. And there have been times when I've been pleased at that God would do that. And there are times when I've not wanted that. You know, I don't want to deal with this so that I can, you know. There's a great line from Bishop Tutu in a book called Country of My Skull by Angie Krog. And she's talking about the formation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. And Bishop Tutu was asked, you know, this is of course after Mandela is elected president, he's putting together a commission to try to bring parties together, bring groups together, establish healing or begin the healing process. Tutu is asked by a committee what kind of person should be on this committee. And Tutu said, the people who should be on this committee are people who are victims, people whose lives have been ripped open, and they have gained an education toward empathy. These people should be wounded healers. And, you know, I read that and could only receive it as a dignified calling. That God doesn't say, look, you know, this stuff happened to you, so you're just a loser or whatever. God says, this happens to you. You have a choice here. You can either become a wounded healer and walk other people through it, or you can let it take you and you can drown in it. And, you know, I'm clinging with everything I've got to the whole wounded healer because girls like it more.
Well, and remember the, you know, yeah. Way to pee all over it.
Yeah.
You know, remember the Toni Morrison line, though, about does she write because she had some tremendous pain in her life?
Yeah. She said no. She writes because when she was a child, she walked into a room, her father's eyes lit up. Mm-hmm. That's a beautiful line. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, when you decided that you wanted to write, and you have this, I think, hysterical scenario of going to a writer's workshop and looking for some formulas on what will make your writing work or sell or whatever. Do you find yourself, now that you've written a few books, and in this exchange that you describe, you discover there is no formula, but are you trying to, do you work with one even maybe unconsciously now that you've got some books out, you've got some coming? Do you work with a structure now, or how does this happen for you?
Early on, my books are memoir, but often it's sort of topical memoir. So rather than chronological, here's what happened first, here's what happened second, I try to take an issue, either it's a theological idea or a topic like money or something like this, and I try to write from camera angles about that topic. And so let's say, you know, I'm trying to write about the topic of finances or money. Then I want to look from various camera angles at the topic and let the reader come to his own conclusions. So that's one formula I'm doing. So I'm just looking for different perspectives. But the other, it's not necessarily a formula, but I grew up, you know, listening to teachers, made horrible grades, did terrible in school, you know, grew up in church also, couldn't pay attention to the sermons, just couldn't do it. And whatever it is about having 3 points and then a poem doesn't work for me. And I don't learn, I daydream, I check out. And so I wanted to figure out a new way of communicating. And in order to do that, what I thought was, how is it that I realize an idea is true? I mean, how does my brain actually work? Well, my brain doesn't suddenly go, oh, here's a point, and then 2 weeks later, oh, there's a second point, and 3 weeks later, oh, there's the third point. This proves that idea is true. And then let's wrap it up with a poem. My brain doesn't do that. What my brain does is it has experiences. So I talked to this girl at this coffee shop, and she said this, and I don't even remember it. And then I'm reading a book, and it has this paragraph, and I go, oh, you know, that reminds me of that thing that she said. And then, you know, I wreck my car, and it puts me in this emotional state where this sort of thing, and I'm hypersensitive to this, and then I get this letter. And that solidifies all 4 of those things until not just my head agrees with the idea, it has dramatically impacted the way I feel about life. And so when I write a chapter, I'm trying to go, I want to paint these experiences to create that, so that by the time the reader's done with this chapter about this topic, they understand it holistically. And I think a lot of times what happens is this is the way all of us learn. We learn this way. And then what we do is once we've learned it, we try to rationalize it intellectually. And then our speech, trying to help other people understand it, is the rationalization. It isn't the process of coming to terms with the idea. And I want to write the process of coming to terms with the idea.
Well, and I think that comes across really powerfully. In fact, one of the reasons I like the title, Blue Like Jazz, is that when I was done reading it, it felt like I had been listening to jazz, which was, we've got some riffs here, we've got some riffs here, these bursts of clarity and revelation where it all seemed to kind of come together, the words with the music, and I read that and I looked for a structure for it. Jazz doesn't really have the same kind of structure that 4/4 time might have, or country music might have. It can be all over the place, but it has these moments, these bursts, and that's what I sensed out of your book, and your other books as well. And that's what you just tried to explain, is how that happens, right?
Yeah, I think so. No. Well, first of all, thank you very much. But yeah, I think that's why it works the way it works. And in a way, I'm trying to make myself smarter than perhaps I am. I don't know how to write any other way. I mean, if you told me, Don, prove this point with 3 points in a poem, it's going to be ridiculous. And I just can't do it any other way, and so that's kind of what comes out.
Well, one of those points that just sort of burst into clarity for me was, you have a line in Blue Like Jazz where you talk about the most difficult lie you've ever contended with, and that is, life is a story about me. That was just one of those bursts of revelation in there. And then you go on, no rut in the mind is so deep as the one that says, I am the world belongs to me, and all people are characters in my play. There's no addiction so powerful as self-addiction. I read that and I thought, that's one of those moments where all the instruments came together in that clarity. And I thought, now is that something, did it come out like that, or did you just really, really work at honing that so that, did you rehearse the way jazz musicians would?
No, I edited.
Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
Well, yeah, you do edit down, you edit it quite a bit, and you get it down to this sort of wrapping it up with this idea, or here's the central idea. And in real life, it would be, this is when I realized this. Mm-hmm. And that's the point you're trying to come to at the end of most of your... Sometimes it's just the camera angles. Sometimes all you're doing is looking at camera angles, and you have no point. But by the end of it, people go, wow, I think I really understand that. Mm-hmm. But with that one, yeah, it was, you're trying to edit to a point, and you want the epiphany to happen, and so you don't let it out of the bag what you're actually getting at until the very end, and then you go, that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's where it happened for me, was in that moment. Now here's the tension, though, is most of your books are self-reflection. Mm-hmm. And if life isn't about me,
what are you getting at?
Well, I'm just saying there's some tension in there, and what is that tension?
Well, part of it is, if you really break it down, life is not a story about me, and yet it is happening to me. And I see it through the lens of my own eyes and my own ears. And I listen to other people. In other words, I'm a part of this story that God, if you will, is telling himself. And I'm having these experiences. And to pretend that I'm not is, it's just not to embrace truth. And so to write from my own perspective or from my own experiences, this is what I know best. This is what's happened to me. I realized I was self-absorbed. Now to never write again about yourself or something like that is just not true. That's to say, I realized I was self-absorbed, so I killed myself. Well, that's not the point, you know.
It hurt sales, I think.
Yeah, it would hurt. Well, actually, sales would probably go up, but we're not going to take that route.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you know, but it is something that I contend with in terms of, because I believe that. I believe I'm a self-addicted person. And it is something I contend with. And, you know, even recently, last week, I spoke at a kind of a thing for World Vision. And they're planning on trying to raise about $11 to $15 million to help children who are starving. And I'm up there speaking to this group, and I'm thinking, these people get it. I mean, they know what life's about. They've looked it square in the face, and they didn't hide. They didn't go buy a car just to not think about it. You know, they just went, all right, I'll do something. And they started doing something. And it was a very convicting experience for me because I wasn't sure whether I was doing that. You know? And so I'm leaving, I'm going, what in the world am I doing? I'm writing books about me and getting attention from doing that. And, you know, hopefully the books aren't so much about me as much as they are about ideas. And I'm using memoir because it's extremely powerful. And there are a million books that talk about the same topics I talk about. But there's something about looking at them from a personal perspective that offers the reader something. But let me come back to that. This was another example or a way I started to understand, once again, as I do every year, I'm a self-addicted person. And, you know, it's kind of like an alcoholic. You're never not an alcoholic. You're always going to deal with it. And I'm not the only self-addicted person. I believe it's part of the fall of man, that we think more about ourselves than we think about others. And so that's part of it, is just dealing with that in my own personal life, of trying to not overcome that, but just manage it. Because I'm not going to overcome it, certainly not on my own. But then the other part of how could I continue to write memoir-esque kind of books really has to do with, one, if I write it from a memoir perspective, I'm not preaching. And I can't stand books that preach. I mean, they just drive me nuts, you know? And I'm not saying that I'm better than anybody else. Also, I'm not pushing my agenda on you. What I'm doing is, all I'm doing is saying, hey man, you know, I grew up without a dad, and here's what happened. And here's the way I messed up, and then this guy said something to me, and that helped me. And that's it. And for whatever reason, the reader is able to now hear that. Where if I would have said, you know, if you grew up with that dad, you got a lot of problems, and you need to do this. And if you don't, there's going to be consequences. You know, I grew up without a dad. I'm 3 pages into that book, and I'm throwing it across the room. You know? But come at me really lightly and tenderly and tell me your story, and I'll take what I want to take. And so that's part of that vehicle, and the reason I choose that vehicle.
Okay. Donald Miller, it's been a pleasure and a privilege. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.